Gentlemen, we have quorum, and therefore I will start the meeting. We have with us from the Office of the Auditor General, we are studying, as we know, the Phoenix report, and we have with us Michael Ferguson, the Auditor General, with Jean Goulet, Treasury Board Secretariat. We have Peter Wallace, Sandra Hassan, and Sandra Hassan. And from the Public Service and Procurement, Madame Lemay and Ms. Les Linklater. So I guess as per the request, the Auditor General is going to speak for 10 minutes first, followed by Madame Lemay and followed by Peter Wallace. The floor is yours, Mr. Auditor General.
Thank you. Madam Chair, thank you for this opportunity to present the results of our audits of building and implementing the Phoenix Pay system and of Phoenix Pay problems. Joining me at the table is Jean Goulet, the principal who was responsible for both audits. In 2009, Public Services and Procurement Canada started its Transformation of Pay Administration initiative to transform the way it processed pay for its 290,000 employees. There were two projects, one to centralize pay services for 46 departments and agencies that employed 70% of all federal employees, and the other to replace the 40-year-old pay system used by 101 departments and agencies. Lors de nos audits, nous avons examiné.
In our audits, we reviewed Public Services and Procurement Canada's development and implementation of the Phoenix Pay system and how the department managed the pay problems that the implementation of Phoenix caused. In our audit of building and implementing the Phoenix Pay system, we examined whether the decision to launch the new pay system included considerations of whether the system was fully tested, fully functional, and secure, and whether it would protect employees' personal information.
Nous avons conclu que le projet.
We concluded that the Phoenix project was an incomprehensible failure of project management and project oversight, which led to the decision to implement a pay system that was not ready.
De respecter les budgets et.
In order to meet budgets and timelines, Public Services and Procurement Canada decided to remove critical pay functions, curtail system tests, and forego a pilot implementation of the system.
Phoenix executives ignored obvious signs that the Miramichi Pay Centre was not ready to handle the volume of pay transactions, that departments and agencies were not ready to migrate to the new system, and that Phoenix itself was not ready to correctly pay federal government employees. When the Phoenix executives briefed the Deputy Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada that Phoenix was ready to launch, they did not mention significant problems that they knew about. Finally, the decision to launch Phoenix was not documented. In our audit of Phoenix pay problems, we examined whether Public Services and Procurement Canada worked with selected departments and agencies to fix Phoenix pay problems so that government employees would receive their correct pay on time. After Phoenix went live in February 2016, the government frequently could not pay public servants accurately or on time. We found that pay problems continued to grow throughout the period of our audit. A year and a half after the government launched the Phoenix Pay system, the number of public servants waiting for a pay request to be processed had reached more than 150,000 in the 46 departments and agencies whose pay services were centralized. Those 150,000 employees were waiting for about 500,000 pay requests to be processed. Those numbers did not include the outstanding pay requests in the 55 departments and agencies whose pay services were not centralized, and also did not include the outstanding requests required by the collective agreements with federal public service unions that were signed in the fall of 2017. Les problèmes ont tellement augmenté.
Problems grew to the point that the value of outstanding pay errors totaled more than $500 million. At the end of June 2017, this amount consisted of money owed to employees who had been underpaid, as well as money owed back to the government by other employees who had been overpaid. Departments and agencies struggled with Phoenix pay problems from the time the system went live. However, it took Public Services and Procurement Canada 4 months to recognize that the problems went beyond normal processing levels. We concluded that Public Services and Procurement Canada did not identify and resolve pay problems in a sustainable way to ensure that public service employees would receive the correct pay on time. In fact, according to the department, the backlog of unresolved pay requests continued to grow after the date of our audit conclusion.
À mon avis, trois facteurs.
In my opinion, there were 3 issues that were common to both the Phoenix implementation project and the department's immediate response to the post-implementation problems. Those were a lack of oversight or governance to guide management activities, a lack of engagement with affected departments, and an underappreciation of the seriousness of the problems.
Before I close, I want to mention that in addition to the 2 audits I referred to, included in our spring 2018 reports of the Auditor General was a message from the Auditor General in which I indicated that I believe that the culture of the federal government enabled Phoenix to become an incomprehensible failure, and I believe the committee should consider how that culture contributed to the failure. Madam Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Now we go to Madame Lemay for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm joined today by our Associate Deputy Minister, Les Linkletter. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the Auditor General's studies of Phoenix. Public Service and Procurement Canada accepts the Auditor General's recommendation and has taken measures to respond to them. I want to begin by acknowledging that this issue is fundamentally about people. This situation has put a strain on many public servants, for which I am deeply sorry. I know we've said it, but we're sincerely sorry. This issue is also about those working hard to fix the pay system. I can assure you that we have extraordinarily dedicated teams that are working very hard to address their colleagues' pay issues. Without question, this situation has taken a heavy toll on too many employees. Le rapport du printemps du vérificateur général.
The Auditor General's Spring Report examines the planning and development of Phoenix from April 2008 to April 2016. This period predates the senior leaders now working on pay at Public Services and Procurement Canada. But while the decision makers have changed, the lessons of past actions cannot be forgotten. There were serious flaws in the planning and implementation of Phoenix and in the broader transformation of pay administration initiative. We know that cost and timelines were prioritized. As a result, poor decisions were made. Critical elements of the project, including some system functionality, testing, change management, and training, were removed or deferred. These decisions, coupled with the elimination of 700 compensation positions and the resulting loss of critical capacity and expertise, led to a government-wide transformation that couldn't perform as planned, and users who weren't prepared for this significant change. Within the senior levels of PSPC, and I would say across the government, the project's scope and implications were vastly underestimated. The Goss-Gilroy report also cited this fundamental gap as a central failing of the project. When the deadline for implementation came, it was thought that the system was ready to go. Evidently, it was not.
Acted with ill intent. But the 2 senior executives responsible for the project, who reported to the Deputy Minister, did not properly assess the complexity of the undertaking, the cumulative impact of their decision, or the seriousness of the early warnings. The performance of these senior executives have been evaluated and appropriate measures have been taken. They are no longer involved in the pay administration, and they did not receive performance pay for their work on Phoenix during 15-16 when the system was finalized and launched. As I mentioned, this situation has caused significant stress for many employees. Understandably, people want someone to blame. What has happened is unacceptable. The Auditor General has identified that senior executives at PSPC made significant mistakes. but he has also acknowledged that there were oversight and governance issues. I believe that there were multiple points of failure. We have to learn from all of them. Accountability needs to be coupled with authority for the projects like Pay Transformation to succeed. Public Service and Procurement Canada's official had full authority on Phoenix, but not over the government-wide human resources processes. For example, we should have had an integrated HR to pay approach all along. We need to do better. We need to give our people the tools and the environment needed to succeed. Madam Chair, we can't rewrite history, but we can benefit from it. The Auditor General reports provides invaluable advice that he is helping us to move forward. Passons maintenant aux recommandations spécifiques formulées.
I'd like to turn now to the specific recommendations offered by the Auditor General in his spring report, which focus on future planning of IT projects. PSPC has a long history of managing many large-scale, complex, multifaceted projects on behalf of clients, such as pension modernization and the long-term vision and plan for the parliamentary precinct. We currently manage over 430 projects with a budget of over $30 billion. PSPC has rigorous and effective processes in place to manage large-scale projects. Our experience with Phoenix has highlighted the need for an enhanced approach for the management of complex enterprise-wide IT projects. To fill this gap, we will work with partners to develop a gating tool. This tool will determine if a specified project under our responsibility should be managed through departmental project management practices and processes or through an enhanced government-wide IT project management approach. We will also develop an enhanced project management playbook detailing how our government-wide IT projects are to be managed, clearly laying out the roadmap of what has to be done and by whom. It will address governance and oversight, project management principles, roles and responsibilities, and the audit function.
To the Auditor General's recommendation by ensuring that we have a robust governance and oversight for all government-wide IT projects under our responsibility. This approach will also ensure that enterprise-wide IT projects include a stakeholder engagement plan to ensure active collaboration with departments and agencies. This engagement will allow us to better define system requirements and, importantly, validate system performance. These IT projects will also include a formal software upgrade plan and a comprehensive contingency plan. Finally, PSPC will ensure that internal audit provides the Deputy Minister with the appropriate assurances regarding project governance, oversight, and management. Madam Chair, work is underway to develop and formalize both the gating process and the playbook. But I want to assure members that the lessons drawn from Phoenix are already being applied within PSPC. For the here and now, our priority remains helping employees facing pay issues. In November, we announced a suite of measures to stabilize the pay system and reduce wait time and late transaction for missing pay. These activities were based on the findings of Goss-Gilroy report and aligned with the Auditor General's fall recommendation. Oversight has been strengthened. Departments and agencies can now monitor and act on the quality of their data. Submission of timely and accurate HR information into Phoenix has a major impact on the timeliness and accuracy of pay. In May, Minister Qualtrough visited the Public Service Pay Centre in Miramichi and announced the expanded rollout of a new pay pod approach, an idea that originated with the staff. Pay pods are teams of pay specialists who are assigned to serve exclusively a department or an agency. A pilot of this approach reduced the case backlog of 3 pilot departments by 30% overall, and their backlog older than 30 days has gone down by 41%. We are very optimistic about the positive impact of the pay pod approach, and we are looking forward to the impact as it's rolled out across more departments over the next year. Enfin, nous avons accru la capacité et amélioré le service aux employés.
Finally, we have increased capacity and service to employees. As I mentioned, a critical gap was created when more than 700 compensation positions were cut in 2014. This meant that Phoenix was implemented with only 550 compensation staff. We have since almost tripled this amount. Recognizing the need to provide more useful support to employees, we have also enhanced our Client Contact Center, and they have direct access to Phoenix as well as other systems. This allows employees to get detailed information about their pay files directly from public servants working at the center. We continue to refine and implement improvements and are beginning to see slow but steady progress. Our most recent dashboard shows that our backlog is down 25,000 transactions from last month and, with minor fluctuations, has steadily declined since January 2018. As pay pods are expanded, we expect this decline in backlogged transactions to pick up speed. To conclude, Madam Chair,
Service problems are completely unacceptable, and addressing them remains our department's top priority. We are working relentlessly to ensure that public servants are paid correctly and on time. There were serious flaws in the planning and implementation of the pay transformation. It is clear that there were multiple points of failure. Our responsibility moving forward is to ensure we learn from all of the mistakes made so that something like this never happens again. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Wallace for 10 minutes, please.
Thank you so much for the invitation to appear before your committee and help with your important work in reviewing the Auditor General's report on building and implementing Phoenix. Joining me today is Sandra Hassan from Treasury Board Secretariat, Assistant Deputy Minister of the Compensation and Labour Relations Sector. En tant que secrétaire du Conseil du Trésor, j'appuie le Conseil dans son...
as Secretary of the Treasury Board, I support the board in its role as the employer of the core public service. In that capacity, I want to start by saying that the government takes very seriously its responsibility to pay its employees accurately and, of course, promptly.
Employees and their families are unacceptable, and we are deeply sorry for that. I echo the sentiments expressed by Madame Lemay. We are taking action not only to resolve these issues, but of course to also support those employees who have been affected. The government has put in place several measures for those affected employees. These measures, of course, include ensuring that advances are made and paid on a priority basis, and providing flexibility in the recovery of overpayments, and establishing effective claims processes to compensate employees for expenses and financial losses occurred because of the unacceptable challenges associated with Phoenix. In tandem with these support efforts, a huge push is underway, led by Public Services Procurement Canada, to stabilize the pay system. At the same time, and this of course touches on the key themes raised by the Auditor General last week, we are equally determined to mitigate the risks associated with Phoenix and ensure that we are never confronted by a project failure of this magnitude. Last year, Treasury Board Secretariat commissioned Goss Gilroy to look at some of the very issues raised by the Auditor General. We see the recommendations of this report, along with those of the Auditor General, as foundational guidance. In its October 2017 response to Goss Gilroy, the government said that it is committed to building the capacity in key areas such as project management, information and technology management, revamping its approach and policies for project management and procurement, and, of course, excelling in service delivery for the benefits of Canadians. On pay transformation specifically, the government has already put in place new interdepartmental governance in place, both within the senior ranks of the public service and, of course, through the ministerial working group. I'll now turn to the Auditor General recommendation for the Treasury Board in this most recent report. On y spécifie que tous les projets
It states that we should, for all government-wide information technology projects, carry out independent reviews of the project's key decisions to proceed or not, and inform the project's responsible deputy minister and senior executives of the review's conclusions.
And without reservation, we concur with this vitally important recommendation. We will conduct independent reviews of government-wide projects to identify corrective actions. We will communicate the conclusions and remedial actions required. In the meantime, we are, of course, strengthening our policies as well as improving governance, changing the role of the Chief Information Officer to further ensure that government-wide IT initiatives are well planned and executed, and I echo the sentiments expressed by my colleague moments ago. Now I will turn to Budget 2018 and Phoenix. In Budget 2018, the government made a number of commitments to address the ongoing challenges in the Phoenix pay system. One of these of direct relevance to Treasury Board Secretariat is the provision of $16 million to be led by Treasury Board Secretariat experts along with our colleagues in public sector unions, technology providers on a way forward for a new pay system. In looking at all options, we will have a relentless focus on the user and on a system that links HR transactions with HR actions with pay transactions. This will not happen overnight, nor should it happen overnight, being mindful of the lessons we have learned from Phoenix. We will diligently apply those lessons and ensure that all projects move forward on a constructive, timely, and thoughtful basis. In closing, let me reiterate that my department, along with senior management throughout the public service, are fully engaged in this file. Merci. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Committee members, the witnesses will stay till 1 o'clock, but we would like to a little extension after 1, so we'll go in camera for 2 minutes to just discuss the timing for Monday. Okay? Thank you. We'll start off with the first 7-minute round. Mr. Jawari, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Before I start my question, I'd like to table the following document in both official language that was acquired through Access to Information Project, and I'd like us to hand it over to clerk to distribute it to all the members. This has to do with the briefing that was provided to the Minister on February 18 vis-a-vis the status of Phoenix implementation. And back to the witnesses. Thank you very much for your testimonies. Large business transformation enabled by technology such as the Phoenix implementation usually go through a very structured implementation approach when it's being led by one of the large 5 implementation organizations. A number of discussions has been had around what were the challenges such as oversight culture, but I really want to focus on the set of activities that happens prior to what the terminology in the large business transformations are called go live. By way of background transparency, I was a management consultant for 25 years, and I've implemented a lot of large business transformation enabled by technology. So I'm very familiar with the process that the Phoenix went through. So as part of the go no go or go live decisions, traditionally there is a call or there is a sequence of a go no go decision has been made, and during that process the readiness assessments of the project from various aspects are reviewed, such as project management, the ability to see the go live as well as the transition and the stabilization. Policies such as security, access to the information, processes, whether the process is being redesigned, technology such as functionality system working properly, people such as training, etc., whether the organization restructuring was completed. There are 2 other elements that I haven't heard much of. One of them is the implementation and rollout strategy, and the other one is the contingency plan. As far as implementation and rollout strategy is concerned, traditionally we have either a phased approach or we have what's called a big bang approach. And during a phased approach, a pilot project is launched for a specific department to make sure all the functionality works. And from your testimony, it does look like that pilot was skipped or it was decided not to proceed with it. Therefore, from an implementation strategy, it was decided that all functionality, all side, or what's called a big bang approach will be taken. Now, when an organization chooses to go with a big bang strategy or implementation strategy, the huge risk as far as system implementation is if something goes wrong. And hence the concept of a contingency plan, which is basically how do we roll back, and in case something goes wrong, what is our recovery strategy, plays a huge role in that. What I'd like to ask is, during this go live, during this readiness assessment reviews that was done, were there ever a recovery strategy or a contingency plan discussed? And if it was discussed, what was it?
Thank you very much for the question. I'd just like to start by saying that neither I or Mr. Linkletter were there at the time, so I will be answering based on my knowledge that was either that I gathered through discussions, through reading, or through colleagues. So and before I do, I just want to point out that we often forget that this pay transformation was really two projects. There was the modernization, the IT project, but there was also the consolidation, which was the pay advisors, and so those two happened at the same time. In terms of contingency, to go directly to your question, you're correct that from what I gather, also the pilot project was not done. The decision not to do the pilot project was done considering that there was going to be more testing done closer to wave one. The contingency plan was for the transfer of the data because the biggest, my understanding is that the biggest risk that was felt at the time was that actually when you turn the switch on, the data would not transfer from one system to the other, and the paychecks every 2 weeks would not go out. There was a contingency plan until after the first wave. If there would have been any fatal errors in that transfer, they would not have moved to the second wave. There was no fatal error, so by default, the second wave was basically going. In terms of contingency plan for what we're facing now, in terms of the compensation advisors and being able to process all of the transactions, it's clear that there was no contingency plan at that level. And frankly, I think part of what we're learning is that this was never, the complexity of this and it was never estimated. It was underestimated. There was no contingency plan for that aspect. So we had to react in real time to increase the capacity of people to be able to do the transactions.
So when I look at this and I look at the presentation that was done, there was a review of the technology was done, there was a review of the process and a review of the people, and I'm wondering when the switch was turned on, and you know we went from one system to another system, and then we started experiencing all these challenges. Was there really an option considered that, okay, you know what, it's not working now, let's switch back to what we were doing before? Or this was a path that we had set ourselves to go, well, not ourselves, but the project management has set us on a path of no return. We didn't have any other choice but going live.
So there was a very short contingency plan for the transfer of the data. Immediately after wave one, if there had been problems in the data transfer, then they could have stopped. There was no problems with the data transfer, so they decided that's how the project was planned. No fatal issue with the data transfer. But this is not like I'm thinking of the employees that are listening. That has nothing to do with their pay, because it's actually the ongoing pay that we're doing. Where the problem started is all of these change request, I'll say, you know, all the actings, the overtime, all of those things that we had to do, either manual work or there was more that was that we had to do, so the capacity was not there to be able to.
Thank you, Madam May. We go to Mr. Macaulay for 7 minutes.
Great, everyone, welcome back. Mr. Ferguson, I was watching the testimony with the Senate. We had some from Queensland, from Australia, talking about their issues with their rollout and their payroll, and they said they're very similar. Their Auditor General as well said they had very similar issues that we had here, but they tackled theirs, the very third payroll, and they said after the third pay run, they started to address issues after 1 month, and they've reached what we've been calling here a steady state after just 4 months. Have you looked at how they tackled their problem compared to how we tackled ours in Canada, for lessons that we should learn here or things that we overlooked here?
So we did look at what happened in Queensland and how they resolved it, and we really looked at that as reference material to I guess assess what was going on here, both in Public Service and Procurement Canada and in Treasury Board, to determine how the government here in Canada was dealing with the issue. So that's that's what we were doing, and we found the same types of things that you just said, that they recognized the problem very quickly and recognized that they needed to put in place a way of dealing with it. Fundamentally, we said here it took much longer to recognize the seriousness of the problem and put in place sort of an all-of-government governance structure to deal with those problems. So I think the Queensland example is a very good reference point for how to deal with those types of issues.
Yeah. We, in committee, from the very beginning with Phoenix, the Queensland issue actually came up, I think, 2.5 years ago, brought up by ourselves and our NDP colleague. Do you think if we had a chance to learn from them immediately, we could have avoided a lot of the problems that we're facing now?
Well, I think the largest issue that probably caused the slowdown. So there were a couple of things. Number one was the need to have recognized that this was going to be a problem. This was going to be a long-term problem and not something that would be resolved quickly. But I think the other thing about it was, again, it goes back very much to the audit we just released and the decision to launch Phoenix, even though the information was there indicating that the compensation advisors couldn't handle the volume. So I think the biggest problem at that point, once it was understood that the compensation advisors couldn't handle the volume, how do you get more compensation advisors? So I think that was what needed to be identified early on, and how many of them. But then it would take time to get those people, get them trained, get them understanding the system, to be able to bring them back on. So I think there were the two things: the slow recognition, but also the fact that there just were not enough compensation advisors to deal with the problems.
The Australians did mention they jumped on that immediately and flooded workers into the issue again almost immediately, I think by their third or fourth pay run. They also testified that they would not be considering switching that pay system at all. They've had a long stretch fixing it like we are having with Phoenix. Do you believe they're going down the right path of just stabilizing, fixing what they have rather than switching to a new system? And that leads into, what do you think of our path that we're looking at here of stabilizing Phoenix, pouring resources into it, but at the same time looking at starting a brand new program, brand new system?
So it's the government's decision, what it wants to do long term in terms of a pay system, regardless of whether it's going to stay with Phoenix or it's going to move to something else. It needs to make sure, it needs to get Phoenix stabilized. It needs to get Phoenix to the point that it is processing transactions correctly. Because obviously, if you're going to stay with Phoenix, it needs to be able to do the job. If the government decides it wants to change systems at some point, it can't start a new system up with starting off with many thousands or hundreds of thousands of errors. The system needs to be able to have good information. So one way or another, they have to get that information stabilized, and then the longer-term decision, that's a policy decision of government.
You don't have an opinion on it?
I'm not allowed to have opinion on it.
Thanks. Over the course of your research, I'm just wondering if you found any indication that the Minister's office was receiving regular and proper briefings. One of the things that came out of the Senate testimony is IBM commented in, I think it was December, they got shut out entirely, weren't invited to do any briefings, weren't invited to offer any information and back. And I think we've heard other testimony that Minister Foote preceding Mr. Qualtrough was not receiving regular updates.
Well, so again, our reach does not extend into conversations that happen in ministers' offices. Once we get into that world of cabinet confidence, we can't get there. But I think what I can say very clearly is our audit indicated that the senior executives of the Phoenix project were controlling all of the information and the flow of information that went up. We saw that they did not fully brief the deputy minister. So I think by extension you can surmise that information could not then have flown further from the deputy minister. But again, what actually happened in ministers' offices, we have no way of knowing.
Yeah. You've called the program and actually other programs in your audit incomprehensible failures, and I think most of us in this room will agree, and it's not just over Phoenix, but we hear again and again, people were consulted, but a lot of that information did not make it up to the very top. And the department, and I'm just wondering, how we can force openness, because it's not just the Phoenix program. We have a lot of other programs, whether it's providing safe drinking water, the shipbuilding project, which is going to be 60 to 100 billion, the fighter jets. How can we ensure going forward we actually have the openness required so the minister can make the proper decisions so we don't end up in a situation like this again where everyone seemed to know there was a problem, but it's not getting up to the minister or the proper decision makers?
And you have 15 seconds to respond.
Well, I think there are two aspects to it. I think one is procedural, to make sure that people recognize when there is an issue and bring the issue forward. I think the other part of it is cultural, to make sure the culture within government is open to that type of conversation.
Thank you. We go to Mr. Blakey for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. One of the things I wanted to ask the Auditor General very, very quickly was we had the Minister of the Treasury Board at committee here back in the fall, and I was talking to him about the 4,000 civilian members of the RCMP who are going to be deemed into the public service, and at that time I asked him if it really made sense to be moving them into the public service and onto the Phoenix payroll system when it was obviously a mess and it wasn't working. And he agreed that it didn't make sense, and shortly thereafter workers were notified that that deeming would be postponed indefinitely. Subsequently, it's been reported in the media that the government plans to go ahead with that deeming process in 2020. Do you think the government is in a position to predict when the problems of Phoenix are going to be resolved and take a serious decision like transferring another 4,000 people onto the Phoenix payroll system, or are they not really in a position to predict when it is that these problems will be resolved?
Well, I think in order to predict when the problems will be resolved, there needs to be an indication that the problems are starting to reduce. I think we've heard today that there are some signs, perhaps, that some of that is happening, and with the approach, the pod approach, that maybe that will help. But I don't think the signs yet have been significant enough to really indicate that the problem has turned around. Again, I can't speak to a decision like that. We haven't audited that decision. But I think in terms of the government being able to predict when the system is on the route to stabilizing, that's going to be very much evident by the data and the analysis.
Thank you. And I know you mentioned in your general message that there were changes that had to go beyond the recommendations that you made in your report, and you also made some comments today about the fact that the scope of your investigation doesn't cover everything. Are there other types of investigation or other avenues that ought to be pursued in order to try and get some of the answers to the legitimate questions that fall outside the scope of your particular study?
Well, what we do is, various different types of audits. This audit is a performance audit. It is very much an audit of a government system, a government program, processes, how all of that rolled out. That will let us, and what we do in that type of an audit is we follow the paper trail. We also interview people and get corroboration of what they tell us. But we can only go so far, and we can only comment on certain types of things. It needs to be based on what the evidence shows us. So that's our expertise. I don't have expertise in the other avenues that might be available, but those are things that the committee certainly needs to be, I guess, aware of what those other avenues are, and the government or the committee needs to decide whether it wants to avail itself of those avenues.
We've heard a little bit today from some of the departments involved in terms of the steps that they're taking in order to try and rectify this. But how do we? I mean, you've said elsewhere that government does have a lot of good policy on the books in terms of project management that's supposed to help alleviate or prevent the kind of catastrophic failure we saw in the Phoenix case. How is it that Canadians can have confidence that these things are being addressed and that they're not going to happen again. In your general message, you talk about a kind of pervasive overall government culture. What are some of the signs that you would be looking for that general culture that helped lead to this failure is actually changing, and that we're not just kind of hearing the right kind of form or the right words, but without the substantive content to back it up?
At the end of the message that I prepared, I indicated that I don't have an instruction manual for how to change or fix a culture. I think, though, it very much, the culture, however you want to define that, very much needs to reflect on the fact that somehow, again, as I said in the message, even though we are operating in a world that has many different types of controls in place already, that have been designed to prevent this type of thing. Many of those controls probably were put in place in response to past Auditor General reports when we identified significant issues, but somehow those controls did not work to prevent Phoenix from happening. So I think, I think the first step is a general awareness, within the culture that just, following the form, I suppose, of policies is not going to prevent incomprehensible failures. There needs to be a real understanding of, what the goals are, what the results are that departments are trying to achieve, and that they are focused on those things, and that when something looks like it's going off the rails, that they feel that they can and that they do bring those problems forward. So I don't have the answer in terms of exactly what's the problem with the culture or how to fix those problems. What I was trying to do was raise awareness, and I think if there is at least some awareness about that, then perhaps that can contribute to preventing this type of situation in the future.
Well, thank you very much for that. And with apologies to our witnesses, we're just going to take a brief detour. We're up against the deadline for the estimates, and I had served notice of a motion on Tuesday to extend our study of the estimates until June 20th, 2018, and I'd like to move that motion now. And if you'd like, I can motivate right away, or
Yeah.
or do you want the motion read?
I'll read the motion.
Sure.
It's in order. That notwithstanding standing orders 81.4 and the deadline contained in the order of reference, the committee requests permission from the House to table its report on the main estimates 2018-19 no later than June 20th, 2018. And I've got, okay. Peterson. Yeah.
So, really the reason for presenting this motion is to try and create some more time to study the estimates. And I'm not, I respect our witnesses here, and I don't want to take up all of the time that we have to ask questions of them on an important issue. But the fact of the matter is that these estimates are not like other estimates. The new central vote under Treasury Board pretty seriously and significantly alters the nature of parliamentary oversight over government spending. It's a case I've been trying to make in many forums. I've tried to make that case here at committee, but I've also tried to make that case in the House. When making that case in the House, I've been told by the Speaker that the appropriate place to discuss the estimates is at committee. And we haven't yet had. We have heard from some witnesses. We've had a couple different motions in various forms and at various stages of consideration to call other ministers to this committee to hear more about the initiatives proposed under Vote 40. My motion to that effect was voted down. Other motions are extant. But we haven't had any time to consider the estimates proper either, even though we have over 200 amendments proposed to Vote 40 alone. So if we're going to be told by the Speaker of the House that the place to deal with issues on the estimates is at committee, I think it's incumbent upon the committee to make some time for that. And I would very much like to see that happen, and just haven't been able to make it happen so far. And I would say with respect to the general issue of oversight that I think this raises with Treasury Board 40, I think it's interesting that this motion comes kind of at our last meeting before the estimates are deemed reported, and we're discussing Phoenix, because the Phoenix issue is really about a failure of accountability. It's about people whose job it was to ask the right questions at the right time, either not asking those questions or not having the information that they needed in order to be able to ask those questions. And I would put to the committee that something similar is happening here, that this committee hasn't heard from the people it needs to hear from in order to be able to ask the right questions about the proposed spending in vote 40. And if we're not going to make time in order to deal with the estimates, then we're not going to be asking those questions. So I think it would be unfortunate. I mean, we had a meeting last week where we ended 40 minutes earlier after twice deciding not to deal with the estimates. It was a scheduled meeting. I think everybody normally sets aside the normal committee time in order to be there. The room was available. The translators were there. We had everything we needed in order to be able to deal with the estimates at that time, and we decided not to, and to leave those 40 minutes on the table. So that's why I've been I'm in the unfortunate position of having to take some of the time away from the Phoenix study today in order to try and make more time for what I think is a very appropriate item of business for the committee. So I won't take any further time, but those are the reasons why I think we ought to adopt this motion.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thanks, and I appreciate the motion, of course, but Mr. Blakey may not be aware, but under the standing orders, the leader of the opposition can pick a committee to extend study of the mains. That motion is now on the notice paper, and the leader selected Ogle, not surprisingly. So we expect it will be deemed adopted later today or tomorrow. So the procedure of keeping the study of the estimates open that your motion seeks is actually already in place, and that authority already exists. So I'm not sure if your motion is necessary. We're going to have a chance to go over the estimates sometime next week, I would think on the Monday, and have some witnesses in and testify, and of course subject to our questioning.
We have Mr. Macaulay first. You'll cede to Mr. Blakey?
Thank you very much for that. What I would note is that this motion actually provides for a substantial amount of time in order to be able to try and coordinate meetings. And I'm not, if there's negotiations about a potential Monday meeting, I have not been approached either directly or through the government whip's office to the NDP whip's office about any negotiations for a Monday meeting. There may be some rumors circulating, but there's been no formal discussion with me or with my party about that. What I would say is that the mechanism that's been used by the leader of the official opposition only allows for an extension of the study, I'm sure Mr. Peterson will know, up to the third day preceding the last supply day. And at the moment, our understanding, given the projected calendar of government business, is that the last supply day may very well be on Thursday, which means that the last possible day for consideration would be Monday, which is June 11th, which is 9 days before June 20th, which is the date in my motion. So notwithstanding any legitimate procedural efforts by the official opposition to extend the study, I do think that the motion before us provides a lot more latitude in order to be able to have a bit of extra time to study the estimates, to do it in a way that's more planned rather than a rushed meeting on a Monday, and not knowing whether Monday is going to be the last day or whether we'll have subsequent days. So this motion provides both more time and more certainty with respect to the committee planning its business.
Mr. Peterson, it's you are on the speaking list.
I'm ready.
What?
I've heard Mr. Blakey's argument. I've made mine. We obviously disagree a little bit, but happy to vote on it if you're ready, Madam Chair.
Are you calling the vote? Okay. Peterson is calling the vote.
You have to exhaust the speaking.
Okay. Mr. Macaulay.
I'll just be very brief. I think we support Mr. Blakey's comments. Yes, there is the opportunity for perhaps Monday for a meeting, but I think we should take the time, considering it's $7.4 billion of spending. It's an unprecedented spending amount. We've heard repeatedly for many other committees where the minister actually shows up and is not able to address the $7.4 billion that's in table A211. We heard in safety, we heard in this meeting itself where ministers have come up where they're not able to explain one penny in detail of what that money is being asked for. In fact, we actually heard in this committee where a senior assistant deputy minister and a chief financial officer said it was preposterous for Parliament to ask for details of spending before we granted the authority. So I think we're addressing a culture issue that Mr. Ferguson has brought up, where we actually have assistant deputy ministers telling Parliament it's preposterous to ask for details of the spending, that they want authority first to spend the money before they will deem to allow Parliament and therefore taxpayers to vote on it. I think it's a very important issue that Mr. Blake has brought up, and we fully support it.
Okay, so I'll call a vote on it. All those in favor of Mr. Blakey's motion?
Please?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Recorded vote.
On Mr. Blakey's motion, Mr. Ayub.
No.
Mr. Drouin.
No.
Mr. Jahari.
No.
Madame Mendes.
No.
Mr. Peterson. No. Mr. Kelly.
No. Yes.
Double voting?
Yes.
Mr. Macaulay.
Yes.
Mr. Blakey.
Yes.
Declare the motion defeated. We'll continue with the next round of 7 minutes. Mr. Drouin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. Madame Lemay, I want to bring you. I want to put on the record that we've got access to. Well, somebody ATIP'd this presentation, and not sure. You probably at the time. I don't think you were there yet, but this was a presentation. It was given to the DM and Minister's office, and the curious thing that I'm looking at here is on page 3, where are we on technology? I've got automated 80,000 business rules, completed 16,000 test scripts, completed performance testing, some outstanding issues for which manual processes have not been developed until fixes are introduced in May and September 2016. At the bottom of the page, written in bold letter, ready to go, exclamation mark. Same thing on page 4, ready to go, exclamation mark. Same thing on page 5, ready to go, exclamation mark. And we now know today that it was not ready to go, but how, had you been there, how would you have reacted to this information, given obviously the information that were given to your office at the time and to the minister's office was essentially that this system was ready to go? And I'm wondering, I don't see any alternatives in here. Was there an alternative to the Phoenix Pay system should it had not gone forward at that time? Now that with the information that we have today, do we know that?
So you're correct to say that I wasn't there at that time, and this reflects what we said earlier, that it was thought that the system was ready to go. Obviously, it wasn't. Maybe just to answer your question, hindsight is 20/20, right? And I don't I can tell you how I deal with these things today. Should I have a presentation like that, I would have to be comfortable that we are in a position of ready to go before I brief the minister on that. I believe you're referring to a February. That's the one I know of that says ready to go.
February 18th, 2016. Yes.
So, I would hope that I would never get to a point where I get a presentation like that and then I have to go back. We're trying very hard, Les and I and Michael, our other colleague, to create a culture at PSPC and learning from Phoenix, frankly, but a culture where the questions, the discussions will take place, that we'll be able to ask the deep question and have those conversations, create safe space for employees to have the respectful workplace, a healthy workplace. That's what we're striving. It's not an easy thing, though, and I think we just have to remind ourselves that this is something that will take time and va falloir être absolument convaincu parce que I'd have to say
We'll have to be absolutely convinced.
I make to staff, we talk about this and creating this space and creating this environment, but we can't stop because it will take time. I think employees need to see that we walk the talk and that we mean that. I would not want a presentation like that arriving to me without having been prepared for the type of recommendation.
On comprend un peu, on comprend le rôle de PSPC.
We understand PSPC's role as you are trying to implement this throughout your department. But what is the responsibility of other departments in the Phoenix payroll system? Human Resources, for example, Treasury Board. What is the role they now play in this file? We're no longer where we were at the time. We really underestimated collectively the complexity of this project and the consequences for everyone and the roles and responsibilities that should have been clearly defined from the beginning. That's become very clear with Goss Gilroy's report. Now, Les is leading a team that is really looking at human resources and pay. It's an integrated team. Every department has to deal with HR issues with their employees, with management. It is so important with Phoenix. We learned a great deal. We've implemented governance to be able to have these discussions. You mentioned the exactitude of data. Are you confident today? And earlier you said that we would have needed an integrated approach to human resources and pay from the very beginning. Are you now confident that you have the right data? Did data play a role in the implementation of the system at some point? I think it must be admitted that we are in catch-up mode from the very beginning of Phoenix's implementation. If we could restart, roles and responsibilities would be very clear. Since the implementation, we're catching up. We're more and more confident. The departments are more and more involved. But as I was saying, we're working very hard on it. I would have preferred that we be at the starting point to have this type of discussion, to talk about roles and responsibilities, rather than have to talk about it once the project is implemented. And that's a lesson we've learned. And that will apply to every other pan-governmental project. I just want to say that PSPC manages a lot of large projects successfully, over 400 right now, over $13 billion worth. This is a unique project. There may be others, but really this affects all of government. We need to start before a project like this goes through and ask if it's a government that affects a project that affects all of government, or is it more limited in scope? I think it's a more different approach. Thank you.
Last week, what did you mean by culture? And I only read the news report at some point, but you really hit the nail on culture. And what do you mean by that?
Well, again, the reason I raised it was I was reflecting on the audit that we had done on Phoenix and the recommendations that we had made, and just being concerned that, yes, there could be more changes to approaches and changes to policy, but would that be enough to actually prevent another Phoenix from happening? Right? Again, you can look at all of the controls that are already in place. We have program evaluations, we have internal audits, we have departmental audit committees, we have departmental performance reports, departmental plans and priorities, we have Auditor General reports, we have all kinds of things in the system that are supposed to prevent something like Phoenix from happening. And every time there's a problem, we make recommendations and some other controls go in to try and prevent something like Phoenix from happening, but somehow it happened.
Thank you.
So that's, to me, that's the issue that needs to be examined, is what was it in the culture that allowed that to happen?
Thank you very much. We go to the 5-minute rounds with Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. And Madam Lemay, this is before my time on committee, but you appeared in July of 2016 when the size and scale of the Phoenix fiasco was just beginning to be recognized, and it was an emergency meeting held in summer. My colleague, Mr. McCauley, I understand, asked you then who was going to be fired, and you had rightly pointed out that fixing the problem needs to be perhaps the priority. But here we are 2.5 years later, the problems all still exist. You mentioned in your opening remarks that, and we have now an Auditor General's report that we're discussing today, that largely placed the blame for the fiasco on 3 executives and the way that they had controlled information and failed to convey critical information to the then Deputy Minister and Minister. So I ask now again, in light of your remarks earlier where you said that 2 executives didn't get paid bonuses and are no longer working in payroll administration, could you at least at a minimum assure Canadians that rightly, as you acknowledged in your remarks, are demanding accountability, that the executives that gave us the Phoenix fiasco are at least no longer employed in the public service?
So I just want to start by saying that there were actually a small number of executives working on the Phoenix implementation, and when I look back, that shows how we underestimated the whole project. But there was 2 senior executives that I mentioned that reported directly to the DM and had the overall decision-making authority. Those executives, they made mistakes, and their performance was assessed. They are no longer on pay. Not all of them. Some of them are still with the government, but others have left.
Individuals. So
one
both
is
of them
still
are
with the government, the other one is not.
Okay. Now, what are you doing now? You addressed it in your opening remarks, and we've heard about it in this report about the culture. What steps are you taking to change the culture at PSPC?
Like I said, I think the first thing is it has to come from the top, right? It's how it's about what we say, but also walking the talk. And you can ask my colleagues, you can ask our employees. I absolutely promote an environment where we have discussions. So at every meeting, whether it's my management meeting, we want the discussions. We want to have different views. Diversity is in many forms,
if I may, are there documented outcomes from these discussions? Because if you look at when we look at this report, there is an organizational chart that shows all kinds of meetings from a variety of different committees that reported through to executives that then reported through to the minister and deputy minister. I'm sure that I can imagine that at the time they thought that they had wonderful collaborative meetings where people were encouraged to speak their mind. Maybe not, but whether that's the case or not, there were no documented decisions, and it leaves the public to conclude that circular meetings and circular inconclusive meetings took place, and then 2 or 3 executives made decisions without disclosing evidence and facts to their superiors. So what are the concrete steps that are going to have actual accountability rather than just more feel-good type discussion around a culture of meetings, I guess?
So I'd say there's 3 things. First of all, we will make sure that whatever policy directives that are in place will be totally respected. But in terms of, we're doing a lot of work, I told you in response to the Auditor General's report, in terms of identifying if a project is a government-wide project. Once we know it is, we will set it up differently. We will make sure that there's no circular, as the Auditor General identified, committees reporting all to the same person. We're going to disperse that. We're going to make sure that the DM has direct advisory committees and independent advice. So all of these things we're developing right now, we are actually starting to apply them to the way we do business at PSPC. So concretely, we will have processes, but the third leg is not as concrete, and I think as important is making sure that we have the environment, the work environment, where people feel that even if we put all these processes in place, they feel they can raise issues, have the discussions, and not fear of anything. So it's creating a safe, healthy environment on top of the processes, which was we were trying to do.
Thank you very much. We now go to Madame Mendez for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of you for being here with us today. for a subject that seems to keep growing in everybody's eyes. I would like your observations, if at all possible, on the fact that in 2014, executives at the time of the Pay Transformation Initiative received an award for excellence for the excellence of their service at the time that Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. We didn't yet know if it was a success because the system had not yet been launched. That's the first thing. But secondly, how can we think that in these very early stages of the project that an award for excellence could be granted to people who had not yet proven themselves? Unfortunately, we're not really able to answer that. Mr. Ferguson, do you have any comments on that? No, not really. I think the only thing I can say is that the award was for different things, including the Phoenix Project. However, I have no knowledge of how this type of award is given. Thank you. I just wanted it to be public, that this was part of this whole saga. One thing that has struck me the most since we've received these reports on Phoenix since last fall, what really struck me was the lack of logic of setting aside or getting rid of almost 800 compensation experts throughout all of government before even testing the system to see if indeed it was going to work. We lost a source of expertise and knowledge of the system, an extraordinary source, when we got rid of these individuals or invited them to retire. I do not understand how we could do such a thing. I agree we reduced the project by half. If my numbers are good, we went from 264 million to 165 million. Was dismissing or laying off these individuals one of the consequences of this reduction in budget? In fact, the point you raise, and I think it's very important, because as I was saying from the beginning, there were really two projects. There was the modernization project, but at the same time, we had a consolidation project. If we compare with Australia, which was done earlier, in Australia, they didn't let anyone go. They kept their officers. We had to completely rebuild our capacity when it came to compensation advisors. That really put us in catch-up mode from day one.
One department. It wasn't the whole of government, not even the whole state government. It was just one department. So there's a big difference in talking about the federal apparatus and talking about one department in one state in Australia. But it does, I mean, this issue of letting go expertise, Mr. Ferguson, I think this is something that is part of the culture in government when we think about savings and cuts, and that we have to be very wary of. That letting go experts whenever we're trying to do any kind of transformation is a very dangerous thing before we are sure that we have succeeded in whatever transformation we are aiming at. Do you agree with that as being an important factor?
So I think in the Phoenix situation, as the Deputy Minister said, there were really two projects, but the system development project was dependent on the success of the other project of the centralization of the pay advisors. There were very much indications, as we say in the audit, that the pay advisors were not prepared to deal with the amount of workload they were going to be asked to deal with, partly because of the changes that were made to the system. And so the fact that, you know, one should have been on the critical path of the other, right, that the centralization should have been on the critical path to make sure that was functioning the right way before the system was put in place, but they seem to have been kept separate. But I think, and I said that in the message, I think that there very much is, you know, within government, again, when there are these transformative projects that are intended to result in savings, I think that governments, and I'm not just talking about the federal government, but governments in general, tend to try to build those savings into their budget process too quickly. In this case, because of the changes that were made to the system, PSPC, in fact, should have gone back to Treasury Board and said we cannot deliver the $70 million a year in savings because of the $70 million a year in savings were estimated based on the system being able to do certain things, and we have reduced that functionality. But I think...
No, wait, time's up. Thank you very much. Mr. Macaulay for 5 minutes.
Great. Ms. LeMay, you mentioned earlier we can't rewrite history, obviously, but we can benefit from it. Can you tell me what concrete actions you're taking to benefit from this? I know my colleague was asking, you know, how do we get past just meetings and meetings and a culture of meetings and actually get concrete actions done to address what Mr. Ferguson has written up? But how do we prevent a fiasco with the shipbuilding? I'll ask specifically, because we asked, I think it was yourself and Ms. Qualtrough, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, even though has a right to it under the Library or the Parliament Act, he was denied access to the RFP and a lot of the costing for the shipbuilding, which should be vital to the success of the project, but also to taxpayers. So here's a perfect example. We asked about it before. The comment that we got back from you is we weren't sure about it. How do we get past the bureaucracy blocking the Parliamentary Budget Officer or other departments getting blocked by the bureaucracy? What concrete actions are you going to take so we benefit from this fiasco?
So I can assure you that all future major project is looked at differently. We look at the governance. We spend more time at the beginning of a project than we ever did before to make sure that it is set up properly, that no matter, we know people change, it has to be set up so that no matter who goes and when it is, that the information will flow. And you know, when you make the comparison...
How are you doing that so that the information will flow so there's transitional information? We see very clearly at Phoenix, there was nothing passed on from the DM churn and also from government to government when there was a change.
So if we look at the comparison with shipbuilding, it is also a major complex project, but I would say that's where the comparison ends, because on shipbuilding we've got governance at several levels, including ministers, deputy ministers, ADMs, DGs, and we have 3 departments.
But I just gave an example of the bureaucracy blocking the Parliamentary Budget Officer from accessing what he should be able to access by right of law. We've heard repeatedly from Mr. Ferguson, from yourself and other witnesses, everything was set up, it should have worked, but bureaucracy, the culture blocked it. Here we have a perfect example of the culture blocking the Parliamentary Budget Officer. We're aware of it, it's televised, we all know about it.
So
we knew about it 2 weeks ago, but nothing's changing.
So I have to get back to you on that specific point, but I can assure you that in the case of shipbuilding, like there's at least three departments on each decision that are involved. So and central agencies are on board. And on a program like shipbuilding, this is again a very long-term program, and cost and budget are important. But again, remember in Phoenix, we're being accused that cost and budget was actually what was driving the problem. So we have to be careful to find that that balance.
We're not accusing about that. Our concern is what Mr. Ferguson talks about is the culture, and how are you? And you mentioned we're learning from Phoenix. We're going to benefit from it. I'm asking what concrete actions your department is taking to ensure that we're not here 2 years, 5 years, 10 years with whether it's the jets, the shipbuilding, or other things.
So I will tell you again, we spent a lot of time at the beginning of the project to set the governance and the oversight properly, and then make sure that I'll say the leadership is engaged on the large projects.
Okay. Let me ask you, when we look at Queensland, they commented they were able to get to a steady state at 4 months. We're not at a steady state 2.5 years later. They addressed the issues at 3 weeks. We've heard in this committee, Mr. Ayoub's been with us, Ms. Ratanzi, and I think Mr. Peterson, Mr. Drouin from the very beginning, going back to January, February of 2016, where we brought up the issues. They weren't really addressed till 7 months or 5 months later when we forced the emergency meeting in July. why did we wait so long to tackle it when we clearly, Queensland tackled it immediately, got to a steady state, we ignored it, and we're still not at a steady state 2.5 years later?
So there's a couple of very significant difference with Queensland and us. One was raised that's not the same size, not the same scope. I did say they did not let go people, so they started with a full contingent of people and started adding right away. Also, they were right away seized with more, I'll say, my understanding of a more acute problem right away. Remember that our payroll started paying the ongoing every 2-week pay, so the transfer of data.
Months later from your department, there was only 77 issues.
And I would just like to correct the record that we did act in June.
I will let you finish your answer, but Mr. McCauley, you can't ask the question. Go ahead, finish.
So we did actually react before July. We, in June, started setting up, announced the setting up of satellite office. The first satellite office was 4th of July, I believe, or 1st of July that was set up. And we had to recruit. But it was not easy to recruit in July old compensation advisors that had been let go. So bringing the capacity back up to speed has been a real challenge. We've had to train many people. Les could speak to that. It's not an easy thing to build back the capacity.
Thank you. We go now to Mr. Peterson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being with us this afternoon. Always appreciated the time and effort that you spend with us. I want to look back on Report 1, I think we call it, the Auditor General's Report 1, which came out last fall, I believe. And within that report, there was 6 recommendations, I believe, and they were both addressed to PSPC and Treasury Board. So seeing that everybody's here today with the Auditor General, I thought it would be an appropriate time to just check in with the progress on those recommendations and see what's been implemented since that report and how we're progressing along that path. Maybe Mr. Linklater would be.
Certainly, thank you for the question. We have been working very closely with Treasury Board Secretariat and with departments and agencies across the government to follow up on the recommendations from the fall report. We have been looking at key root causes. We did set up a group last summer that had representation across government with IBM and others to be able to do a deep dive with regard to root cause issues, whether they were technology, training, change management, which we're now rolling into a suite of measures, which Minister Qualtrough announced last November as a first pass of key early priorities for the interdepartmental community to work on with the leadership of my team. We have gone forward with governance improvements as recommended. We have the Interdepartmental Committee, the Oversight Committee of Deputies, to which I report, that's chaired by the Deputy Clerk. We have structures at the ADM and DG level that replicate that so that we can bring through systematically issues that will have an impact on addressing the queue and providing improved pay outcomes to public servants. We have also been looking at the capacity building issues, which Madame Lemay has alluded to. We have, in effect, almost tripled the staff complement across the country in Miramichi and in satellite offices to be able to really address the outstanding pay requests and facilitate the transition to our pod processing model, where we will now be looking at employees' files completely as opposed to transaction by transaction. Once they're clean and we're dealing with things in real time, they should not have any further issues with backlog. We've also been looking at a number of issues around go-forward strategy that was announced in Budget 2018 under Treasury Board's leadership, and that work is progressing. And we've also been dealing with the technical issues that continue to occur, looking primarily at those change requests for the system that will have the biggest impact on system improvements and interface issues between the 32 HR systems and Phoenix, to make sure that to the extent possible we're getting better data alignment and allowing departments and agencies with new tools around timeliness and accuracy of data to look at their own internal processes, as Madame Lemay was saying, from employee to HR before HR sends things to the pay center in Miramichi.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Wallace, I think we got a minute left probably, so I'm sorry to cut kind of, or Madam Hassan, if you want to.
Recommendation, which was to work with PSPC to submit accurate information and to enable departments to meet the terms and conditions of employment, and also to support PSPC and departments and agencies in the development of performance measures to track and report on the accuracy and timelines of pay, as Mr. Linklater alluded to. So we're collaborating with PSPC as well as departments and agencies to address these recommendations. And we continue to work diligently to provide the information to this committee as soon as possible.
Okay. Always cut off at the end there. I just want to look at, thank you for those answers, by the way, and just Mr. Ferguson, one of your recommendations in the most recent report suggested TBS should carry out mandatory independent reviews for government-wide IT projects. Would you see these as limited only to IT projects, or would you see an application for other large-scale projects as well?
Well, I think the recommendations we made obviously were in the context of an IT project, but I think those recommendations need to be considered in the context of other large and complex projects as well.
Thank you. Mr. Blakey, for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. So we've heard a few times already just today that the two projects of consolidating the Pay Center and implementing the new software were conceived as two separate projects, and I think we've heard from the Auditor General that was problematic. At the very least, that those two projects should have been considered together, even if they weren't kind of merged into one project. But I'm just wondering, for my own understanding of what was going on, were the same executives that were managing the software transition also managing the consolidation, or was that actually being run by two different teams?
It was, I believe, the same. What you have to realize over the 8-year time frame, though, many people filled the different roles. So when we say that, we have to be careful because there's, over the 8 years, I haven't counted the number of assistant deputy ministers and different associates and DMs, but a number of people were involved. So, but yes, the two projects were managed through the same branch.
Okay. Because I think part of the reason why that's relevant is just trying to understand. I mean, if the old pay system had been allowed to continue past the implementation of the new one, so that it was available to go to as a backup, then that strikes me as just a kind of obvious best practice. And it seems to me that the reason why that wasn't the case is because the consolidation was happening, and the two projects weren't kind of in each other's critical paths, and so there wasn't consideration given to the fact that pursuing the consolidation too quickly would remove the possibility of preserving the old system until we knew that the new one was working. Is that a fair characterization of what happened?
It's hard for me to, at this point, to know what in the past, because whether, they obviously were linked because the consolidation had an impact.
Like who could we ask? If it's not you, who could we ask that question to?
Well, it would have been how the two projects were conceived and timing of those two, and because they did finish at the same time, which I'm not convinced it was planned that way originally, but that's how they finished.
Okay. I did want to ask, with whatever remaining time I have, I know it won't be a lot, both to Ms. Lemay and Mr. Ferguson, I don't think we'll really get to it. But I know that in an organization, from a management point of view, I mean, you don't want to create an environment where people feel they can't make any mistakes at all because you don't have any learning. But you certainly also do need accountability when you have catastrophic failure. You also send a wrong message. And I'm just wondering, without anybody really being held accountable for this at the end of the day, which seems to be the situation, what kind of message does that send within the organization?
You can hold your answer. He'll have another 7-minute round, so you can hold their answer then. We'll now we have time for a full 7-minute round, first round. So we're going to go with Mr. Ayoub. 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to all of you for being here. I'm going to go directly to culture and philosophy. In all the discussions we've had, and Mr. Ferguson, your report is very clear. We've been expecting your report for some time, especially when it came to Phoenix, regarding the reasoning of going forward with Phoenix. You talked about culture. I also want to talk about philosophy, and I'm wondering if the two are linked. When I look at one of my sources, it's the Canada Information Commissioner that commented that when it came to the budget at the time in 2010-2011, very clearly at that time, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Flaherty, the order from the government was to cut, control budgets in order to be able to eventually control the deficit and have a balanced budget. They called that the action plan for reducing the deficit. And we're going back to the time when Phoenix was being prepared, where 700 positions were cut, where everything was set up to go and get 5 to 10% cost reductions everywhere. In your report, 1.62, you say that this led to the system being implemented knowing that there were serious problems with it. And you say that the executives responsible for Phoenix were more concerned about time and money limits to respect because the new system had to meet up with those targets. This is where philosophy and culture intermingle. There's a culture of fear that I can see in these reports where there was no way to flag errors because people didn't want to be pointed out. We were heading straight into a wall. They knew they were heading straight into a wall and they did it anyway. And they were so afraid of saying it that they didn't say it. And now we have new officials. It's a new government, which is being blamed. Officials are being blamed. Certain employees whom we did not name, don't want to name. It's pointless to name them, actually. I think it's the culture that needs to be changed, and that's what's happening now. To set up new processes, to make sure that the resources that we hire, that we keep, that's what Ms. Lemay has been saying, and we're trying to hire the right people who have the right experience and will implement the right practices. This culture of fear, the philosophy of avoiding deficits at all costs, which we're being criticized for daily, this doesn't mean that you have to run deficits, but there are philosophical and economic choices to be made there. How do you see the reconciliation between this philosophy, this culture, and this desire to achieve goals at all costs, now that we have a situation that we are still cleaning up, and we don't know when it's going to end? Although we see that there's progress and improvements. Every government has objectives and goals. It is the government that needs to set the policy of the day. But for officials, it is important in every case to provide all the information and all the details. Because here we've indicated that with the concerns about budgets and deadlines, the executives responsible for Phoenix did not mention the fact that there would be a reduction of the project savings. In any environment, there will be different consequences. It is important that officials understand those consequences. and that they communicate them to the minister, to the deputy minister, in order to say there will be different results because it is not possible, perhaps, to achieve all those objectives. In any case, there are objectives, but it is the role of officials to explain what is possible and the problems associated. Thank you for that. Of course, officials have a role, but there is a link of trust that seems to have been absent because those messages were not communicated. Every official did not receive the same information. And for the ministers and deputy ministers in place, during the launch of Phoenix, what I find particular is that businesses like IBM have the habit of running pilot projects. They conduct project management in order to verify whether this type of large project can be implemented. But the base that we should have expected was suppressed. When we're not able to run a pilot project, I am struck by the fact that there was no pilot project for such a vast change, that it was deliberately removed, that it was not done. In any other type of project, we run pilots and make sure that it's going to work, and we look at it in details. From what I've heard, we're running a great deal of pilot projects. But perhaps we didn't look closely enough at what was happening. That's something that perhaps should be followed up on. I heard that certain employees are no longer there, or others have been reassigned. We conducted a study not so long ago on whistleblowers. Mr. Ayub, I'm sorry, you'll have to wrap up.
Beaucoup. Merci. Mr. Macaulay for 7 minutes.
Great. My colleague talked about a culture of fear, and considering all of the information that was brought forward with the issues of Phoenix, we actually heard testimony in this committee that January of 2016 that the unions were bringing it forward. We've seen documents from all the HR, heads of HRs, the head of finances for all departments, all brought the issues forward. I would suggest it's more of a culture of non-accountability than a culture of fear that we're suffering through right now. Ms. Lemay, I want to read a quote from you from the previous report. This is 1.78 of the spring report. It says, "We found that 16 months after the pay problems first arose, there was still no comprehensive government structure to resolve the underlying causes of the problems. In contrast, Queensland Health, which had a similar problems with pay system, put in place a comprehensive governance structure within a 4-month of the pay problems arising." I want to get back to why it took us so long. Now, we talked about capacity. We actually have an order paper that's from the government, signed by Mr. McKinnon, that there were no capacity issues. Was that just part of, again, this internal problem of not accepting that there was an issue? And I also want to bring up the bit about hiring and addressing the staffing ramp up. We did another order paper question that showed that we had one job posting for 10 days between January and July for pay advisors. So we said that we were trying to find some, but the information provided to us from bureaucracy shows we only posted one posting for 10 days. And then that expired, we posted no other things. And then we also have the report showing capacity was not an issue at Miramichi. Now, obviously it was an issue, but we're actually in writing from the government saying it wasn't an issue. Is this part of the whole problem, again, of the culture where people are just putting forward wrong information to cover up?
Mr. Macaulay, I have been speaking to this committee actually since the July 2016 special committee meeting.
Been at them all.
Yes, and I have there been as open as I can be with you at every time in terms of where we're at with this. The capacity building has been an issue. There's no compensation out there. We have to train them. So that's part of the, we've tried many things. We've tried with the unions. We've tried posting. I can have Les speak more to it. Now we have to train them. So that is a real issue.
Yeah, Mr. Ferguson's comment again, and this was spring, we found 16 months after the pay problem, still no comprehensive governance structure to resolve the underlying causes of the problems. Why we had numerous meetings. Why 16 months after we still don't have a governance set up to address the problems?
So you'll remember that at the beginning when the launch happened, a lot of people expected to see some issues. You'll remember the first, I think it's in May, we were thinking there's just a few issues. Then in June...
I'll correct that. May and February and March, people on this side of the table brought up repeatedly, it's much larger. It was only the government that said it's not an issue, it's a small issue. So I'll correct you there.
But I apologize, I wasn't there in February 2016. But when we came in May, it was that the small number, and then we said by June we realized, okay, this is bigger. It's not the normal, and that's when we started setting up the offices. We started proceeding. You'll remember that we received a number of transactions from the department that were pre-Phoenix. It was something we did not expect, and at that time we thought that by building the capacity to address that, it would help.
Let me just interrupt you.
Can I just?
Okay, let me just interrupt you there. We all knew in January, because we actually brought up. I actually have you, our Minister Foote, stating, well, actually, yes, the unions warned us in January of 2016 there were problems with Phoenix with the testing. We have all the reports showing there were issues. We had meetings in February where we brought it up. We had our meetings in Ogo in April when we brought it up, and we had issues in May. Why did it take us so long, June, to recognize, despite everyone telling us we had issues? Why did it take us so long? Is this just, again, part of the culture of...
I'm trying to get at. Remember, the go live was February. The first meeting I recall is May 2016, where we talked about numbers. Then in June, we built the capacity. The one thing we realized is in the fall that this was a much more complex problem in terms of the having to make sure the HR to pay, and that we needed to make sure that the integration and the data, and that's when we started engaging with department. And in early 2017, that's when Les joined us. We did the Prime Minister set up the working group of ministers. There's a team of integrated HR to pay people set up, and we've been continuing to build the capacity and work on those fronts. So I think that, we have acted very quickly with the information that we had. The planning of the project, there was a number of flaws. When the implementation happened, we had to react.
I'm almost out of time. I just want to ask a quick question, Mr. Ferguson. You've been, I think, 4 times with us now in the last week. How confident are you that your recommendations that you put in the spring report and this report are getting followed up on? That we're addressing the incomprehensible culture or the incomprehensible errors?
Well, again, in our work, we like to go back and do an audit before we actually comment on how successful implementation has been. We've seen the action plan. I think, we are quite confident that the departments involved have taken our recommendations seriously. But again, to actually say how effective they have been, I think the metrics will show that. If the number of people and the number of outstanding pay changes start to reduce, the metrics will start to show whether they are being successful. And then sometime in the future, we'll come back and do some additional work on it.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I just want to introduce my motion, please.
I'm so sorry. You're out of time. We'll go to Mr. Blakey. I'm looking around saying, where? You did.
I don't usually have a hard time getting noticed, so yeah.
You're tall enough. 7 minutes, please.
I do want to come back to the question of the 2 projects being pursued in tandem and whose decision that was. And I guess part of the reason I want to come back to it is just what I find disappointing in the answer, and I appreciate that Ms. LeMay was not there and that it wasn't the current minister either. But when we talk about trying to learn lessons, like in your answer, I'm not reassured that you've figured out who took that decision because you wanted to talk to them, or that the department is making an effort to talk to the people who made those decisions at the time to try and understand what went wrong. I mean, have you reached out to some of these former deputy ministers who were there to sit down with them? And if so, why can't you offer a better idea as to what the thinking was at the time? Is it because you haven't talked to them about it?
So first, I would say that I can tell you how we would plan it if we had to, so that we could go there. But we've been so focused on getting the issue solved, and I don't mean to sound like, but we have really focused on the future and getting it a pay issue addressed. We're now starting to be able to turn our eye to, okay, we've obviously taken the lessons from the Auditor General, from Goss Gilroy, try to adjust, but also all in the go-forward basis to make sure that no other project was starting and being tripped. So that's where we've had to focus our attention. We will soon be able to kind of go back more in depth on some of these, like where, what. To a certain extent, like we'll have to figure out, like we want to get those answers if they benefit us in planning for the future in terms of lessons learned. But we've been able to capture what the Auditor General and Goss Gilroy has said for the future. So to answer your question, we've been much more focused on future than backwards right now. So.
I do hear you on that. I would humbly suggest that. I mean, I do think that those conversations are important in part to try and initiate that culture change that the Auditor General has talked about. Because I think if you don't go back and try and talk to those people, and I'm not talking about a witch hunt or persecuting them or anything like that, but if you don't have those conversations, then I don't know how you show in your department that it matters who took what decision when, and that people now are still concerned to know. Because the answer that, well, I wasn't there and I don't know, and you'd have to talk to somebody else, but I don't know who that person would be, seems to me to be part and parcel of the culture that leads to a lack of accountability if people feel that the buck can be passed that easily.
I just want to reassure you, though, I don't, and I'm sorry if that's the impression I gave. I mean, we did talk to the people that were in the department at the time, but again, delving into all of the 8 years of what decision what was made when at that point, it didn't feel like the best use of our time at the moment. But I take your point, and we will. I mean, as we reflect on going forward, the minute we have this more under control, we're just starting to see some signs. We're not declaring victory. We're just working really, really, really hard to get people paid accurately and on time.
So in the time that I have left, I would just like to come back to the question that we left off on with my last intervention about how do you address mistakes within an organization, because you don't want to be so hard on everybody all the time that nobody feels that they can make a mistake. That leads to a kind of perverse culture. But on the other hand, if there aren't any consequences for anybody, particularly with respect to very large mistakes that have important consequences both for government in terms of costs and everything else, but also on staff morale and the lives of individual staff that are being seriously affected at a personal level, then that's probably not also good for an organizational culture. So I'd like to hear first from you, Ms. LeMay, and then I wouldn't mind hearing from Mr. Ferguson as well on the same point. So if you can try and just give a brief answer so we have time for both.
I just want to thank you for the question because it's a really good one. In this specific case, the senior executives that were responsible and were reporting directly to the DM, their performance was assessed, and we have tools in place within the federal government. Those were used, and the one thing that I do believe is that there was no ill intent. I don't think these people woke up in the morning to make the system crash, and I don't think if you look now at everything and all the information we have, yes, they made mistakes, but even the Auditor General pointed out there were other issues of oversight governance. So to bring it down to 2 or 3 people, I think is not understanding the complexity of this whole thing. So the people were assessed, our performance was assessed with the tools that we have, and I think that was noticed by, I know in my department, and it's that balance to be fair in our assessment of mistakes.
And Mr. Ferguson, what do you think of that as a response?
Well, I think what I would say, and something like the Phoenix situation is particularly difficult to address that question, right? Because the problems touch so many people and have affected so many people. However, as the deputy said, I'm sure that the people that were involved in the project didn't intend for it to turn out this way. But I think 2 problems we saw in the course of our audit. One was it was not clear right from the very beginning who was going to be accountable and responsible. You know, so and then the other part of it was, and again you see the sort of part of the consequences of it today, the churn, for example, at the deputy minister level, the number of different people that served in that role as deputy minister. You know, makes it hard. Even the individual that was in place at the time of the decision had only been in that role for about a year. So I think that makes it difficult to identify somebody as accountable, and that's why in my message I indicate that either by design or by accident, it almost seems like Phoenix was set up in a way to not have somebody that was specifically accountable or responsible. And I think a lot of that was because in the beginning it was not identified who was going to be accountable, and then there was so much turnover at the deputy minister level that it makes it hard to assign that accountability.
You got 10 seconds. Thank you. Mr. Peterson, last 7-minute round. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just, I think I'm the last intervener here, so I'm just going to thank the department, frankly, for working from a difficult situation towards some progress, towards the outcome that we all want, and is that to make sure that all the federal public servants get paid properly and on time. So kudos to that, to the lot of work that you've done to recover from, frankly, what was a very difficult situation. I think we all agree with that, and it came about for a plethora of reasons, as iterated in the reports that we've seen and testimony here before our committee. You know, there was the forced savings of $70 million, the removal of 800 personnel, the lack of oversight, which we see in the most recent report. Some of these behaviors actually rewarded as innovative, which I don't think is appropriate. And then we're moving forward now and trying to get to some resolution, which I think is important. And I do commend all of you have played a role in actually helping us all as public servants ourselves to improve the lives and the situation, which must, we all empathize and sympathize with employees who are in a precarious situation for pay reasons, if they're not getting paid on time, or have tax liabilities that put them in a situation where they're not able to pay their own bills. So I think on behalf of everyone on the committee, I think it's fair to say that we thank you for the efforts you're making. There's much work to be done, but the progress is always good to see. And I just want to go back, so thank you for that. And I want to go back to the word that we've talked about a lot, culture. And the culture seems to be, I don't want to call it the scapegoat, because when you say scapegoat, there's the implication that it's not deserved. But the culture, I think, is deserved is blameworthy at least, and deserved for some of the shortcomings. But Mr. Ferguson, you're kind of the one that put this concept into our committee's deliberations here with your second report. How would you characterize the culture that was in place between, I think, the 8-year frame of your second report from 2008 to 2016, if you could characterize it even?
Well, and you cannot capture culture in one word. You know, there are many different ways of looking at it, and I think in the message that I delivered, I talked about a number of different things. You know, and again, as we talked about earlier on, I think one of those, particularly when you're dealing with something like a payroll project, is governments in general. Back office administrative projects are not government's favorite types of projects. So I think that they are, by definition, controlled very tightly on things like budget and timeline, but it is very difficult to establish how much it's going to cost or how long it's going to take when you're doing a complex IT project. That's a very difficult thing to do up front. You know, I think I think that's one aspect. I think the other aspect, again, is governments in general have a tendency to try and when there are going to be budget savings from a project, they have a tendency to try and take those out of departments too early. I think that we also see, you know, and again, I think Phoenix illustrates it, the case of sometimes when people are responsible for something, they fall back to look at the policies and they follow the policies from a form perspective rather than a substance perspective, so that they can say, yes, we did everything in the policy, but not necessarily making sure that they were doing it with the intent that the policy was requiring it to be done. So I think there are many different aspects of the culture, you know, and like I say, for me, it was a reflection on somehow Phoenix happened. Despite all of the different controls and all of the different procedures and policies in place, somehow Phoenix happened. I'm not trying to say that my characterization of culture is right, but I think there needs to be a discussion of how was it that Phoenix was able to happen, even though you know, all of those controls and restrictions, and do people feel that those controls, in fact, are too restrictive, so therefore they need to be able to say, oh, look, we followed the policy, and be able to defend themselves by saying we followed the policy. So I think there's a lot of thinking and discussion that needs to go on about the culture.
So I mean, I like this concept you introduced, the form over substance. So is that to suggest that an employee, a public servant, when stuck with a dilemma in the implementation of this program, would refer to the policy to figure out what should I do, instead of maybe picking up the phone and talking to somebody? Is that part of the problem?
Well, I think part of the problem is more they look to the policy tells them to do something, and then they do it in a way that they can argue fits the form rather than the substance. And in the Phoenix situation, the example I would give would be that the senior executives brought in SI Systems to do an external review. But SI Systems, and they did their work, and they identified some issues, but they were all, their work was controlled essentially by the people responsible for the project, and they reported to the people responsible for the project. But the substance for why an external review was done was to get essentially an independent and objective view, and that review should have been done reporting directly to the Deputy Minister rather than to the project executives. So it was a case of saying, okay, you know, the policy requires us to do this, we will do this, but not done in a way that was really respecting why the policy was saying it should be done.
And I think you alluded in your report, or actually didn't allude, you expressly said there was a miscommunication, I think. I don't want to mischaracterize it, but I'm going from memory. There was a mistrust between the levels within the bureaucracy, and then between perhaps the DMs and the political. Or not a mistrust, but maybe a reluctance to have open communication?
Well, just the importance of understanding that you know, there needs to be a certain tension between what ministers are trying to achieve and the role of civil servants. I mean, obviously, in the political world, there's more of a focus on the four-year election cycle, and I think you know, deputy ministers and the civil service needs to be focus very, you know, have focus on that. And of course, they're responsible to implement government policy, but they also need to be looking more to the longer term as well, and being able to bring forward those types of issues, so that there needs to be a bit of a tension between the ministers and the civil servants.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the witnesses, and I'm going to suspend it for, well, we are still in camera, still in public, so I'll excuse the witnesses. Thank you. We will continue on. I will cede the floor to Mr. McCauley, who has a motion. Go ahead, Mr. McCauley.
Thanks. I just want to bring through my motion.
Okay. Are we back in order, or you were suspending? So.
No, we are back in order. We're back in committee business.
Thank you. Just for my motion that I tabled last week that the committee, I'm not sure if you want me to read it out, the committee extend its sitting on Thursday, June 7, 2018, to hold a panel meeting with Treasury Board Secretariat officials and officials from each Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Department of Finance, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Foreign Trade, Trade and Development, Indigenous Services, Industry, Natural Resources, Environment, Transportation, National Research Council in Canada, Office of Commissioner for Federal Judicial Affairs to discuss their allotments and the main estimates 2018-2019 as per the online list provided by the Treasury Board Secretariat. I think my colleague, Mr. Kelly, will put through a friendly amendment to change it for Monday.
Just wanted to amend it just to change the rule from Thursday to Monday, and I understand there's been discussion and hope that there would be consent just to amend his motion, Mr. McCauley's motion, to substitute the word Monday, June 11th?
11th,
Monday,
yes.
June 11th, rather than Thursday the 7th, and proceed on with the motion from there. That's all I...
And just for the benefit of the committee, we have checked with Treasury Board officials, and they are available Monday afternoon. So the only thing is, first we can agree to adopt the motion. Yes? Unanimous? Yes? Yes? Sorry.
I did want to speak briefly to it, which is I don't oppose the motion or the amendment, but I would just say it seems to me that there have been some discussions between the government and the official opposition. And as somebody who's a vice chair of the committee and represents another official party on the committee, I think that if the government is going to negotiate with opposition members about a supplementary meeting, that they should negotiate directly with the NDP as well as with the official opposition. And that didn't happen. So I just think it's worth having that on the record.
Okay.
And I'm saying in future, it will not be well received if we're not part of negotiations on supplementary meetings.
Point well taken, and I think it was because it was Mr. McCauley's motion. I guess the negotiation took between committee members, actually. So all in favor? Yes. Okay, but one thing that we need to know is that we will have to keep it from 3:30 to 5:30. I think that's the time available for Monday.
It's 11.
11?
It has to be before QP procedurally, I think.
Officials are not available.
We leave it with Patrick when he can find the most officials, because it's pointless if we show up at 3:30 and we just have one person here.
It has to be before QP, I think.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We should focus on where we get the most officials.
Yep, leave it with the officials.
If it's 8:30, they can all show up.
Tell them
But
11 o'clock. Yes.
no, I'm saying just whenever we can get the most officials, so we'll work around what our clerk can find the most people rather than most of us.
And
Okay, Mr.
all I would ask on that front, because I think Mr. McCauley has a very good point, but for travel arrangements, some of us will have to know with some lead time whether,
It's 11 o'clock or
different
3
whether
o'clock. Yeah.
it's happening on a Monday afternoon or a Monday morning. So it'd be useful to know
Fair enough.
sometime tomorrow with
Yes.
enough time to be able to change a booking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Meeting adjourned. I forgot I have the gavel.